Welcome back, y'all. To Heartwarming Tales, the place where every story warms your heart and reminds you what real strength, love, and forgiveness look like. Before we get into today's story, go on and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. 'Cause today we're telling you about a woman who scrubbed hospital floors by night while chasing a doctor's dream in secret, and who built an entire life for her children out of nothing but grit, faith, and a love that once broke her heart. Maya Johnson had wanted to be a doctor since she was 11 years old, sitting in a cramped waiting room in Charlotte, North Carolina, watching a kind nurse gently calm her frightened little brother before a procedure. Something about the way that nurse had spoken, steady, warm, in control, even when everything felt uncertain, had planted a seed in Maya that never stopped growing, even as life did everything it could to convince her that dream was out of reach. Maya grew up the oldest of 4 children, raised by a mother who cleaned houses for a living and a father who left before Maya turned 6. Money was always tight, opportunities always thin, and by the time Maya finished high school with excellent grades, there simply wasn't money for college, let alone medical school. She took whatever work she could find, eventually landing a night shift custodial position at Sterling Memorial Hospital, mopping floors, emptying trash bins, and wiping down waiting rooms long after the doctors and administrators had gone home for the evening. Most people who passed Maya in those hospital hallways barely looked at her twice. She was, to them, simply part of the background, a quiet woman in a gray uniform pushing a cleaning cart, invisible in the way people often make themselves not see what they'd rather not think about. Maya noticed the way certain staff members would talk over her, around her, sometimes about her, as though her gray uniform and the color of her skin meant she couldn't possibly understand the medical terminology floating through the halls she cleaned every single night. But Maya paid attention anyway. She listened to doctors dictating notes. She read discarded medical textbooks left in break rooms. She saved every spare dollar she could manage, and 2 years after starting her job at Sterling Memorial, she enrolled in night classes at the community college, working toward her nursing prerequisites in the few hours between her shift ending at dawn and her children needing her at home. Maya was, by then, a single mother herself, raising her young daughter, Zoe, largely alone after Zoe's father had drifted out of their lives early on. She'd sleep in short, exhausted bursts, study by lamplight, while Zoe napped, and drag herself back to Sterling Memorial each evening to push that same cleaning cart down the same quiet hallways, harboring a dream that most of her coworkers, had they known, would have found almost laughably impossible for a woman in her position. It was during this exhausting, determined chapter of her life that Maya first crossed paths in any meaningful way with Richard Sterling, the hospital's owner, heir to the family that had founded Sterling Memorial. 3 generations earlier, Richard was known throughout the hospital as reserved, hard-working, and somewhat lonely, despite his considerable wealth and status, having thrown himself entirely into managing the hospital following a difficult divorce 2 years prior. Richard had noticed Maya on several occasions during his own late-night work sessions, reviewing hospital finances long after most administrators had left for the day. There was something about her quiet diligence, the way she hummed softly to herself while working, completely unaware most nights that anyone was watching, that struck him as remarkably genuine, in a workplace often defined by performance and appearances. One particularly late evening, Richard, exhausted from reviewing budget reports, wandered into the break room to find Maya seated at the small table, hunched over a nursing textbook, carefully highlighting passages between sips of lukewarm coffee. Startled at being discovered, Maya quickly closed the book, embarrassed, assuming she'd be reprimanded for using her limited break time on personal study rather than resting. But Richard, curious rather than critical, asked gently what she was studying. Maya, hesitant at first, cautiously explained her dream of eventually becoming a nurse, perhaps someday even a doctor, though she quickly added, almost apologetically, that she understood how unrealistic such ambitions probably sounded coming from someone in her position. Richard, surprising even himself, found her explanation anything but unrealistic. A recognized in Maya's quiet determination, a kind of authentic ambition he rarely encountered among the privileged medical students and staff he typically interacted with throughout the hospital. That brief conversation marked the beginning of what would become a series of increasingly frequent late-night conversations between the hospital's wealthy owner and the janitor harboring dreams far larger than her current circumstances suggested she should hold. Over the following months, Richard found himself gravitating toward those late-evening conversations with Maya more frequently than he'd initially intended. What began as occasional encouragement regarding her studies gradually evolved into genuine friendship, then, slowly, into something considerably deeper than either of them had anticipated, or, in truth, felt entirely prepared to navigate. Richard began quietly assisting Maya's educational pursuits. First, simply by connecting her with study resources and occasionally covering costs for textbooks she couldn't otherwise afford. Always careful to frame such assistance as standard hospital investment in employee development rather than anything more personal. Maya, fiercely independent and wary of appearing to trade on any special treatment, initially resisted his generosity. Though Richard's genuine, unpretentious interest in her success gradually wore down her guarded skepticism, their conversations deepened considerably over time, moving beyond nursing textbooks into shared reflections on ambition, loneliness, and the particular burdens each of them carried. Despite occupying vastly different positions within the hospital's social hierarchy, Richard confided in Maya about the isolating pressures of his family's legacy, the loneliness following his divorce, and his own struggle to find genuine, unguarded connection with people who so often seemed more interested in his wealth and position than in him as an individual. Maya, in turn, found herself sharing details of her own life she rarely discussed with anyone: the exhaustion of raising Zoe alone, the constant financial strain, the discouraging comments from family members who considered her medical aspirations unrealistic given her circumstances. Richard listened with genuine attentiveness, never once treating her struggles as lesser or less significant than his own, despite the obvious disparities in their respective circumstances. Despite their growing closeness, both Maya and Richard remained acutely, uncomfortably aware of the considerable barriers separating their two worlds. Richard belonged to Charlotte's most prominent social circles, moving among the city's wealthiest families, all of whom held deeply ingrained expectations regarding appropriate social and romantic pairings. Expectations Richard's own conservative parents had instilled in him since childhood. Expectations that made absolutely no allowance for a relationship with a black hospital janitor. However, genuinely he might care for her. Maya, for her part, understood this reality, perhaps even more acutely than Richard himself. Having witnessed throughout her entire life the particular ways in which wealthy white families in the South often treated relationships across racial lines as scandal rather than legitimate connection. Regardless of genuine affection involved, she harbored no illusions about the considerable social risk Richard would face should their growing friendship ever become known publicly as something more. Yet despite these acknowledged, considerable barriers, something genuine and increasingly powerful continued developing between them regardless, neither entirely able, despite their better judgment, to resist the authentic connection that had grown from those late-night hospital conversations. Richard found himself, for the first time in years, genuinely excited to arrive at work each day, no longer simply managing hospital finances, but anticipating the warmth and authenticity Maya brought into his otherwise isolated existence. Maya, similarly, found herself experiencing an unfamiliar sense of being genuinely seen and valued, not for her position or her usefulness, but for her authentic self, her intelligence, her determination, her quiet strength qualities Richard consistently acknowledged and admired. Despite the considerable social pressures that should have, by any reasonable calculation, kept them firmly apart, their relationship, though carefully hidden from the broader hospital community, and certainly from Richard's prominent social circle, gradually deepened into genuine romantic connection, both of them recognizing the considerable risks involved, yet increasingly unable or unwilling to deny the authentic affection that had developed between them over these many months of quiet, late-night conversation and mutual support. They began meeting occasionally outside the hospital itself, careful always to choose locations unlikely to expose their relationship to Richard's social circle. Quiet drives outside the city, evening walks in less prominent neighborhoods, careful, guarded moments of genuine connection stolen from lives otherwise entirely defined by vastly different social expectations and circumstances. Despite the very real risks and challenges surrounding their relationship, both Maya and Richard found themselves, for a time, genuinely hopeful that their connection might somehow prove strong enough to eventually overcome the considerable social barriers separating their two worlds. A hope that would, in time, prove tragically premature, though neither of them could have fully anticipated, during those hopeful early months, just how painfully that hope would eventually be tested. As months passed, Maya and Richard's relationship deepened considerably, evolving from careful, guarded meetings into something Maya, despite her own considerable caution, allowed herself to genuinely believe might have a real future. Richard, for his part, spoke increasingly of his growing affection for Maya, occasionally hinting, in quiet, private moments, at futures neither of them dared speak about too openly given the considerable social risks still surrounding their relationship. Maya continued diligently pursuing her nursing studies throughout this period, Richard's quiet encouragement and occasional practical support helping sustain her through the exhausting demands of working full-time while raising Zoe and attending night classes. She successfully completed her nursing prerequisites and was accepted into a competitive local nursing program, a remarkable achievement given her circumstances. One that filled her with genuine pride and hope regarding her future prospects. Their relationship remained carefully hidden throughout this period, known only to a small handful of trusted individuals. Maya's closest friend and fellow hospital employee, Denise, who helped cover for Maya during occasional late-evening meetings with Richard, and Richard's own personal assistant, who managed his schedule with careful discretion regarding certain private appointments. Despite the necessary secrecy surrounding their relationship, both Maya and Richard experienced genuine happiness during this period, finding in each other a level of authentic connection and understanding neither had previously encountered in their respective, considerably different lives. Richard often expressed genuine admiration for Maya's remarkable determination and resilience, while Maya found herself deeply appreciating Richard's genuine warmth and vulnerability, qualities his prominent social position rarely allowed him to display openly. It was during this period of genuine, though carefully hidden happiness, that Maya discovered she was pregnant. The news arrived with a complicated mixture of joy and considerable anxiety, Maya recognizing immediately the profound challenges this pregnancy would introduce into their already carefully hidden relationship, particularly given the considerable social pressures surrounding Richard's prominent family and position. When Maya nervously shared the news with Richard, his initial reaction, to her considerable relief, appeared genuinely warm and supportive, expressing what seemed like authentic excitement regarding the pregnancy, despite the complications it would inevitably introduce into his carefully managed public life. He spoke, in those initial, private conversations, of finding ways to eventually navigate the social challenges ahead, of his genuine desire to be present and supportive throughout Maya's pregnancy and beyond. For several weeks following this initial revelation, Richard continued demonstrating what appeared to be genuine commitment to supporting Maya through her pregnancy, quietly assisting with medical expenses, continuing their regular private meetings, offering repeated reassurances regarding his intentions to remain involved in both Maya's life and their child's future, regardless of the social complications involved. However, as Maya's pregnancy became increasingly difficult to conceal, and as word gradually began circulating, first as vague rumors, then increasingly specific speculation, throughout Richard's prominent social circles regarding his relationship with a black hospital employee, the considerable pressure from his family and social community began weighing increasingly heavily upon him, gradually eroding the confident reassurances he'd initially offered Maya. Richard's parents, upon learning more concretely of the situation, reacted with the kind of severe, uncompromising disapproval Maya had always feared might eventually surface, making unmistakably clear their absolute refusal to accept any public acknowledgement of Richard's relationship with Maya, threatening severe consequences regarding Richard's inheritance, his standing within the family business, and his broader social reputation should he choose to publicly acknowledge either Maya or their unborn child. Richard, caught between his genuine affection for Maya and the overwhelming weight of his family's expectations and threats, began gradually, painfully withdrawing from the relationship, his once frequent visits becoming increasingly sporadic, his reassurances increasingly hollow and uncertain, leaving Maya, now visibly pregnant and increasingly anxious about her uncertain future, facing the growing realization that Richard's earlier promises might not withstand the considerable social pressures now bearing down upon their relationship. As Maya's pregnancy progressed further, the considerable strain on her relationship with Richard became increasingly, painfully apparent. What had once been frequent, warm private conversations gradually diminished into brief, increasingly tense exchanges, Richard's growing anxiety regarding his family's fierce disapproval becoming impossible for Maya to ignore any longer. Despite her earnest hopes, that their genuine connection might ultimately prove stronger than the social pressures threatening to tear them apart. Maya continued working her demanding night shifts throughout much of her pregnancy, both out of financial necessity and her fierce determination not to abandon her hospital position. Despite the physical toll her advancing pregnancy increasingly took on her already exhausting schedule, she continued, remarkably, maintaining her nursing studies as well. Though the mounting stress surrounding her uncertain relationship with Richard, combined with the physical demands of pregnancy, made this final stretch considerably more difficult than anything she'd previously endured. The breaking point arrived during Maya's 7th month of pregnancy, when Richard's family, having grown increasingly aware of the full scope of the situation, orchestrated what could only be described as a decisive ultimatum. Richard's father called an urgent family meeting, presenting his son with an unambiguous choice: sever all ties with Maya entirely, publicly deny any romantic involvement, and accept an arranged introduction to a young woman from an appropriately prominent Charlotte family, or face immediate removal from any involvement in Sterling Memorial Hospital's management, along with complete disinheritance from the family's considerable wealth and business holdings. Richard, faced with this stark ultimatum, found himself in what would become the defining moral failure of his young adulthood, ultimately unable to summon the courage necessary to defy his family's expectations. Despite his genuine affection for Maya and his earlier promises regarding their child, Aaron headed through his personal assistant rather than delivering the devastating news himself. A brief, deeply painful final meeting with Maya, during which he informed her, with visible shame and discomfort, that he could not continue their relationship, nor could he publicly acknowledge their child, citing vague, unconvincing justifications about family obligations and social complications he claimed were entirely beyond his control. Maya, devastated but unsurprised given the mounting warning signs of recent weeks, absorbed this painful rejection with the same quiet, dignified strength that had carried her through so many previous hardships throughout her life. Se refused, despite her considerable heartbreak, to beg or plead for Richard's continued involvement, recognizing with painful clarity that a man unwilling to stand firmly beside her and their child against his family's prejudice was not a man whose continued presence, absent genuine courage and commitment, would ultimately benefit either herself or her unborn child. "I won't ask you to choose me over your family's money," Maya told Richard during that final, painful conversation, her voice steady despite the tears she refused to fully release in his presence. "But you should know, Richard, that this child deserves a father brave enough to stand up for what's right, regardless of what it costs him. If you're not that man, then perhaps it's better we both know that clearly now, rather than later." Richard, unable to meet Maya's steady, dignified gaze, offered only a hollow apology before departing, leaving Maya alone to face the remaining months of her pregnancy and the uncertain future beyond it, without his support or acknowledgement. Shortly afterward, word quietly circulated throughout Charlotte's social circles of Richard's engagement to a young woman from an appropriately prominent local family. The arrangement Richard's father had specifically orchestrated as a condition of Richard's continued inheritance and position. Maya, devastated by Richard's ultimate cowardice, nonetheless refused to allow this painful betrayal to derail her own carefully constructed path toward a better future for herself and her children. She continued working diligently throughout the remainder of her pregnancy, eventually giving birth to twins, a son she named Marcus and a daughter she named Grace. Determined, despite Richard's absence and the considerable financial and social challenges she now faced as a single mother of 3 children, to continue pursuing her own dreams and providing her children the best possible future, through her own strength and determination alone. The months following Maya's difficult childbirth proved among the most challenging of her entire life, now caring for 3 young children, Zoe, along with newborn twins Marcus and Grace, entirely on her own, while continuing to work her demanding hospital position and maintaining her nursing studies, all without any support whatsoever from Richard, who, true to his family's demands, maintained complete public silence regarding his connection to Maya or their children. Maya's close friend Denise, along with her own mother, who despite her own limited resources insisted on helping however possible, provided crucial practical support during this exceptionally difficult period, helping with childcare during Maya's shifts, offering emotional support through what remained an intensely painful period of heartbreak and uncertainty regarding her family's future. Despite the overwhelming challenges of this period, Maya refused to allow herself to be defined by Richard's abandonment or by the painful circumstances. surrounding her children's conception. She drew instead upon the same fierce determination that had carried her throughout her entire life, channeling her heartbreak and considerable exhaustion into renewed commitment toward completing her nursing degree, viewing her children's future security as powerful motivation to persevere despite every obstacle life continued placing before her. Sterling Memorial Hospital, meanwhile, remained an uncomfortable, complicated presence throughout this period. Maya continuing her custodial position there, despite the painful awareness that Richard, now increasingly visible throughout hospital events alongside his new fiancée, remained a constant, unavoidable reminder of her heartbreak. She endured this difficult situation with remarkable dignity, refusing to allow her personal pain to compromise her professional reputation or her ongoing educational pursuits. Eventually, approximately 18 months following the twins' birth, Maya successfully completed her nursing degree, achieving this remarkable milestone despite the overwhelming challenges of single motherhood, financial hardship, and profound personal heartbreak she'd navigated throughout this exceptionally difficult period. She transitioned from her custodial position into an entry-level nursing role at a different hospital across town, finally putting some necessary physical and emotional distance between herself and the painful memories associated with Sterling Memorial. This transition marked a significant turning point in Maya's professional trajectory, her considerable talent and dedication as a nurse quickly earning recognition from colleagues and supervisors alike. Encouraged by this professional success, and driven by her original, long-held ambition toward eventually becoming a doctor, Maya began exploring pathways toward medical school. Despite the seemingly overwhelming challenges such an ambitious pursuit would present given her considerable existing responsibilities as a single mother of 3 young children. Richard, meanwhile, married his family-arranged fiancée within the year, the couple's wedding receiving considerable attention throughout Charlotte's prominent social circles. Entirely divorced from any public acknowledgement of his previous relationship with Maya or his biological children, Richard maintained this careful public silence for several years, occasionally sending Maya anonymous financial support through his attorney, though he never once attempted direct contact with either Maya or their children during this extended period. Maya, despite the profound pain of Richard's continued absence from their children's lives, made the deliberate choice not to speak negatively of him to Marcus and Grace as they grew older, choosing instead to focus her considerable energy on providing her children the most stable, loving upbringing possible. Despite their father's continued absence, she often told her children, when they eventually grew old enough to ask difficult questions about their father, that sometimes people made choices out of fear rather than genuine lack of love. Though such explanations, she readily admitted, offered little genuine comfort regarding his continued absence from their daily lives. Throughout these challenging years, Maya's determination toward eventually attending medical school never wavered. Despite the seemingly insurmountable practical challenges such an ambitious pursuit presented given her existing responsibilities, she began, slowly and methodically, researching pathways toward this ambitious goal. Determined that Richard's cowardly abandonment would not prevent her from ultimately achieving the dream she'd carried since childhood, nor from providing her children the stable, secure future she remained fiercely committed towards securing for them, regardless of the challenges involved. As Marcus and Grace grew from infants into curious, energetic toddlers, Maya continued balancing her demanding nursing career with the considerable responsibilities of raising 3 children largely alone, all while methodically pursuing the additional education and qualifications necessary to eventually pursue her long-held dream of medical school. The path proved exceptionally demanding, requiring years of careful planning, considerable financial sacrifice, and an almost superhuman level of determination and resilience. Maya's mother, despite her own limited resources and advancing age, remained a crucial source of support throughout this period, frequently caring for the children during Maya's demanding work, shifts, and study sessions. Maya's childhood friend Denise, who had transitioned into hospital administration during this period, similarly remained a steadfast source of encouragement and practical assistance, helping Maya navigate the complicated logistics of pursuing further education while managing single motherhood. Despite these crucial support systems, Maya's daily life throughout this period remained relentlessly demanding, often working 12-hour nursing shifts, followed by evening childcare responsibilities, followed by late-night study sessions preparing for the standardized tests and prerequisite coursework necessary for eventual medical school admission. She operated 4 years on minimal sleep, sustained largely by her fierce determination to provide her children a better future than the considerable hardships she'd personally endured throughout her own difficult journey. Maya's children, meanwhile, grew increasingly aware, as they matured, of their mother's remarkable determination and sacrifice. Zoe in particular, now approaching her teenage years, often assisting with caring for her younger twin siblings. Recognizing intuitively the considerable pressures her mother navigated daily in pursuit of their family's better future. This shared family commitment toward Maya's educational aspirations became, in many ways, a defining characteristic of their close-knit, if considerably strained, household dynamic throughout these challenging years. Financial hardship remained a constant, considerable challenge throughout this period. Maya carefully budgeting every available resource toward covering tuition costs, textbooks, and the additional expenses inevitably associated with pursuing advanced education while simultaneously supporting 3 growing children. She applied relentlessly for every available scholarship and financial assistance program, eventually securing crucial funding through a program specifically designed to support underrepresented minority students pursuing medical careers. Funding that proved absolutely essential toward making her continued educational pursuit financially feasible. Maya's application to medical school, when she finally felt sufficiently prepared to pursue this ambitious next step, reflected the remarkable breadth and depth of her personal journey. Her considerable nursing experience, her demonstrated resilience, navigating single motherhood while pursuing advanced education, and her genuine, deeply personal motivation toward eventually providing quality medical care within underserved communities, similar to those where she'd grown up and continued raising her own children. Her acceptance into medical school, when it finally arrived, represented an extraordinary culmination of years of relentless determination, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment toward a dream she'd carried since childhood. Despite every obstacle life had placed before her throughout this remarkable journey, Maya celebrated this achievement quietly with her children and closest support system, recognizing clearly that this acceptance represented merely the beginning of an even more demanding chapter still ahead, rather than the conclusion of her considerable struggles. Throughout medical school, Maya continued demonstrating the same remarkable resilience and determination that had carried her throughout her entire journey, balancing the exceptionally demanding academic and clinical requirements of medical education with her continued responsibilities as a single mother, relying heavily on her established support network while continuing to model for her children the profound value of perseverance and unwavering commitment toward meaningful, long-term goals. Despite considerable obstacles and hardship, her medical school years proved, unsurprisingly, exceptionally challenging, testing Maya's resilience and determination more severely than perhaps any previous chapter of her considerable journey. Yet, she persevered, drawing strength from her children's growing pride in her achievements, from her deepening professional passion for medicine, and from her unwavering commitment toward providing her family the stable, secure future she'd been fighting toward since that first spark of inspiration in a Charlotte waiting room so many years earlier. Maya's years in medical school and subsequent residency training proved among the most demanding of her entire remarkable journey, requiring not only exceptional intellectual capability and clinical skill, but continued sacrifice and resilience as she balanced these exceptionally demanding professional requirements with her ongoing responsibilities raising 3 children largely without a partner's support. Throughout this period, Maya developed a particular clinical interest in obstetrics and gynecology, drawn toward this specialty partly through her own profound personal experience navigating pregnancy and childbirth as a young, unsupported single mother, and partly through her deepening recognition of the significant healthcare disparities affecting Black women throughout maternal healthcare systems, disparities she'd witnessed firsthand throughout her own challenging medical journey. Maya's residency, training, completed at a major teaching hospital in Atlanta following her medical school graduation, further solidified her growing reputation as an exceptionally skilled, deeply compassionate physician. Her personal experience, navigating considerable hardship, informing a particularly empathetic, patient-centered approach to medical care that quickly earned recognition from supervising physicians and grateful patients alike. During this period, Maya's children continued maturing alongside their mother's remarkable professional journey. Zoe now attending college herself, having witnessed her mother's extraordinary determination throughout her own formative years, while Marcus and Grace, now approaching their teenage years, increasingly understood and took considerable pride in their mother's remarkable achievements, despite the continued absence of their biological father throughout their upbringing. Richard, meanwhile, remained largely absent from any direct involvement in his children's lives throughout this extended period, occasionally receiving updates regarding Maya's continued educational and professional achievements through mutual acquaintances or local news coverage, though he maintained his established pattern of avoiding direct contact, seemingly unable, even years later, to summon sufficient courage to address the painful circumstances surrounding his earlier abandonment. Upon completing her residency training, Maya received several attractive offers from prestigious medical institutions throughout the country, each offering considerable financial compensation and professional prestige. However, Maya ultimately chose to return to Charlotte, drawn by her deep, continued connection to the community where she'd grown up, and by her specific determination to establish accessible, high-quality medical care within underserved communities, similar to those where she herself had experienced considerable hardship navigating healthcare access throughout her own difficult journey. Maya's return to Charlotte marked the beginning of an ambitious new professional chapter, initially joining an established medical practice while simultaneously developing plans toward her longer-term goal of establishing her own independent medical facility, specifically designed to provide comprehensive, compassionate healthcare services within Charlotte's historically underserved communities, drawing directly upon her own painful, formative experiences navigating healthcare disparities throughout her earlier life. This ambitious undertaking required considerable additional years of careful planning, fundraising, and professional network development. Maya, drawing upon her established reputation for clinical excellence and genuine community commitment to secure the necessary support and resources toward establishing her own comprehensive medical facility, an undertaking that represented the culmination of her entire remarkable professional journey since those exhausting early years pushing a cleaning cart through Sterling Memorial's quiet hallways. Throughout this demanding period of professional development, Maya remained deeply committed to her children's continued well-being, ensuring, despite her demanding professional responsibilities, that Marcus and Grace, now navigating their own challenging teenage years, received consistent maternal support and guidance, drawing upon the same fierce dedication that had characterized her parenting throughout their entire lives. Regardless of the considerable professional demands, she continued balancing alongside her parental responsibilities. Finally, after years of dedicated planning, fundraising, and professional preparation, Maya successfully established Johnson Family Medical Center, a comprehensive medical facility specifically designed to provide accessible, high-quality healthcare services within one of Charlotte's historically underserved communities. A remarkable professional achievement representing the culmination of Maya's extraordinary personal and professional journey since those exhausting early years, working nights as a hospital custodian while secretly pursuing her long-held dream of eventually becoming a physician. The opening of Johnson Family Medical Center represented a profound, deeply personal milestone for Maya, marking the culmination of decades of relentless determination, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment toward both her professional aspirations and her children's future security. The facility quickly earned recognition throughout Charlotte's medical community for its exceptional clinical care, combined with Maya's deeply personal, community-focused approach toward addressing healthcare disparities within underserved populations. Dr. Maya Johnson, as she was now professionally known, quickly established herself as a respected, influential figure within Charlotte's broader medical community. Her remarkable personal journey from hospital custodian to accomplished physician and medical facility found her earning considerable local recognition and admiration. Local news outlets occasionally featured her remarkable story, highlighting both her professional achievements and her deep, ongoing commitment toward addressing healthcare access disparities within Charlotte's underserved communities. Maya's children, now largely grown, took considerable pride in their mother's remarkable achievements. Marcus, pursuing his own undergraduate studies with early interests toward eventually joining the medical profession himself, inspired directly by witnessing his mother's extraordinary journey throughout his entire upbringing, while Grace pursued her own developing interests in healthcare administration, hoping eventually to contribute toward her mother's ongoing mission of expanding accessible healthcare throughout underserved Charlotte communities. As Johnson Family Medical Center continued expanding its services and community reputation over the following years, Maya increasingly found herself recognized throughout broader Charlotte's social and professional circles. occasionally attending prominent local events and fundraisers where a remarkable story and professional accomplishments generated considerable interest and admiration among Charlotte's broader community, including, increasingly, its more prominent social circles. It was during one such prominent charitable fundraising event, focused specifically on addressing healthcare access disparities throughout Charlotte's underserved communities, that Maya's professional path unexpectedly, dramatically intersected once again with Richard Sterling, now himself an established, respected figure within Charlotte's business community. Having assumed full leadership of Sterling Memorial Hospital following his own father's retirement several years earlier, Richard, attending the fundraising event, in his capacity as Sterling Memorial's current administrator, found himself utterly unprepared for the profound shock of encountering Maya, now confidently established as Dr. Maya Johnson, addressing the assembled crowd regarding her medical facility's considerable community impact and her broader vision toward expanding accessible healthcare throughout Charlotte's underserved neighborhoods. Richard listened from his seat among the assembled crowd with a complex, overwhelming mixture of profound admiration, considerable shame, and deep, long-suppressed regret as Maya confidently, articulately addressed the considerable audience regarding her medical facility's mission and impact, recognizing with painful clarity the remarkable, hard-won journey she'd clearly undertaken throughout the many years since he'd last seen her. Following Maya's presentation, as the event transitioned into informal networking among the assembled guests, Richard found himself simultaneously desperate to approach Maya directly, yet paralyzed by considerable shame and uncertainty regarding how she might receive such an unexpected reunion, given the profound pain and abandonment he'd previously caused her and their children so many years earlier. Maya, meanwhile, having noticed Richard's presence among the assembled crowd during her presentation, found herself similarly overwhelmed by a complex mixture of emotions, considerable lingering pain regarding his earlier abandonment, combined with a surprising, unexpected curiosity regarding how the passage of so many years and her own remarkable professional and personal transformation might have changed the dynamic between them. Should circumstances eventually necessitate direct interaction? As the evening progressed, both Maya and Richard found themselves circling the periphery of direct interaction, each acutely, painfully aware of the other's presence, each wrestling internally with the profound emotional weight of their shared, complicated history. Neither quite ready, despite the passage of so many years, to initiate the difficult, necessary conversation both increasingly recognized would eventually need to occur between them. The direct confrontation both Maya and Richard had been simultaneously anticipating and dreading finally occurred toward the end of the fundraising event, as the crowd began thinning and Richard, summoning considerable courage, approached Maya directly, finding her momentarily alone near the venue's quiet reception area. "Maya," Richard began hesitantly, his voice carrying the unmistakable weight of years of accumulated guilt and regret. I don't quite know where to begin. Your presentation tonight, everything you've accomplished, I'm genuinely, deeply impressed, though I imagine that means very little, given everything that happened between us." Maya studied him carefully for a long moment, recognizing immediately the genuine discomfort and shame evident throughout his hesitant demeanor, though her own considerable, long-accumulated pain regarding his earlier abandonment remained clearly, understandably, present as well. "Richard," she replied evenly, her voice carrying the steady composure she'd cultivated throughout years of professional and personal challenges. "It's been a long time. I won't pretend this isn't difficult, seeing you again after everything." Richard nodded, visibly struggling to find appropriate words adequate to address the profound weight of their complicated shared history. "I know I have no right to ask this, Maya, but would you be willing to talk? Properly, I mean. There's so much I should have said, so much I should have done differently, all those years ago. I understand if you'd rather not, given everything I put you through, but I'd genuinely like the opportunity, if you're willing to grant it." Maya considered his request carefully, weighing her own complicated emotions against her broader concern for how any renewed interaction with Richard might affect Marcus and Grace, now adults themselves, who had grown up entirely without their father's presence or acknowledgement. After a long, considered pause, she finally agreed to a private conversation, though she made clear, in no uncertain terms, that such a conversation carried no guarantee of reconciliation or forgiveness regarding his earlier abandonment. Their subsequent private conversation held several days later at Maya's medical office following regular business hours, proved profoundly emotional for both parties. Richard finally offering the genuine, unreserved apology and explanation Maya had long deserved but never received regarding his earlier cowardly abandonment. He acknowledged, with considerable evident shame, the profound moral failure of prioritizing his family's expectations and his own comfort over standing beside Maya and their children. Despite his genuine affection for her at the time, Richard explained, as best he could, the considerable psychological weight of his family's threats and expectations that had ultimately overwhelmed his earlier commitment to Maya, though he carefully avoided using such explanations as excuses for his behavior. Instead, repeatedly acknowledging his own moral failure and the profound, unjustifiable harm his abandonment had caused both Maya and their children throughout their formative years. I've thought about you, about Marcus and Grace, more than you probably realize, Richard admitted during their extended conversation. Watching from a distance as you accomplish everything you've achieved, knowing I share biological children with someone as remarkable as you've become, while having done absolutely nothing to earn any place in their lives. It's been a heavy weight to carry, Maya, though I recognize fully that my own guilt pales considerably compared to whatever pain I caused you and our children. Maya listened carefully throughout Richard's extended, evidently genuine apology, her own complicated emotions gradually shifting from guarded skepticism toward cautious, considered acknowledgement of his apparent sincerity, though she remained firmly focused throughout their conversation on the practical question of what, if anything, Richard genuinely hoped to achieve through this renewed contact, particularly regarding potential involvement with Marcus and Grace, now adults capable of making their own informed decisions regarding any potential relationship with their previously absent father. Following her emotionally charged private conversation with Richard, Maya found herself wrestling considerably with how, or whether, to proceed regarding potential renewed contact between Richard and their now adult twins, Marcus and Grace. She recognized clearly her own complicated, still evolving feelings regarding Richard's earlier abandonment, while simultaneously considering carefully her children's independent right to determine, as adults, whether they wished to explore any potential relationship with their biological father. Maya ultimately decided to share the full details of Richard's renewed contact and evident remorse directly with Marcus and Grace, presenting them with complete, honest information while explicitly emphasizing that any decision regarding potential contact with Richard remained entirely their own choice, free from any pressure or expectation from Maya herself, regardless of her own complicated feelings. Toward Richard's earlier abandonment, Marcus and Grace, upon learning of Richard's renewed contact and evident desire toward reconciliation, responded with their own complicated mixture of curiosity, lingering resentment regarding their father's prolonged absence throughout their upbringing, and cautious openness toward potentially exploring some form of relationship, provided Richard demonstrated genuine, sustained commitment rather than merely superficial gestures toward reconciliation. Over the following months, Richard, with Maya's cautious permission, began gradually establishing initial contact with Marcus and Grace, approaching these interactions with evident humility and patience, fully respecting their understandable hesitation and skepticism given his prolonged absence throughout their formative years. He made no attempts to rush the process or demand immediate forgiveness, instead focusing consistently on demonstrating genuine, sustained commitment through his continued actions rather than empty words alone. As these renewed family relationships gradually developed, Maya found herself increasingly reflecting on her own complicated feelings toward Richard, recognizing that her continued anger, however entirely justified, given his earlier abandonment, ultimately served little productive purpose beyond perpetuating her own emotional burden. She began, gradually, considering more seriously the possibility of genuine forgiveness, not necessarily as vindication for Richard's earlier failures, but as a means toward her own continued emotional healing and, perhaps more importantly, toward supporting her children's evident desire toward establishing some form of relationship with their father. I never wanted my children growing up believing their father simply didn't care. Maya later reflected privately regarding her eventual decision toward cautious reconciliation. Richard's earlier choices caused real, lasting harm, and I won't pretend otherwise. But watching Marcus and Grace slowly, carefully rebuilding some connection with him, seeing how much it clearly meant to them, having their father finally present in their lives, even decades later than he should have been. I couldn't in good conscience stand in the way of that healing, regardless of my own complicated feelings toward him personally. Approximately 2 years following their initial reunion at the charitable fundraising event, Maya and Richard had gradually, cautiously rebuilt a form of respectful, if inevitably complicated, relationship, focused primarily on jointly supporting Marcus and Grace's continued development into successful, secure adulthood. Richard consistently demonstrated genuine remorse and sustained commitment throughout this extended period, gradually earning back, through consistent action rather than empty promises, at least a measure of trust from both Maya and their children. While Maya and Richard never returned to the romantic relationship that had originally defined their earlier connections so many years before, they gradually developed a genuine, respectful co-parenting partnership focused specifically on their shared children's continued well-being. Richard finally providing, decades later than he should have, consistent emotional and practical support throughout Marcus and Grace's continued development into thriving, accomplished young adults, both of whom eventually pursued their own meaningful careers within healthcare, directly inspired by their mother's extraordinary example of resilience, determination, and ultimately, remarkable capacity for measured, hard-won forgiveness. Dr. Maya Johnson's remarkable journey, from an overlooked hospital custodian harboring secret dreams, through profound heartbreak and single motherhood, toward eventual triumph as a respected physician and medical facility founder, became, over time, a powerful, widely celebrated symbol throughout Charlotte's broader community regarding the transformative power of unwavering determination, resilience in the face of considerable hardship and injustice, and ultimately, the profound capacity for healing and forgiveness when approached thoughtfully, patiently, and always with genuine consideration toward those we love most, deeply proof that even the most painful betrayals need not permanently define our lives, nor prevent us from ultimately building the extraordinary, meaningful futures we've always deserved. That's today's story, y'all. If Maya's journey of strength, sacrifice, and hard-won forgiveness touched your heart, don't forget to hit subscribe and share it with someone who needs a reminder that no matter how hard the road gets, your dreams are always worth chasing. We'll see you in the next heartwarming tale.